Before we dive into today's episode, I want to highlight one of the core values of Fame Ready: expansion. Because building a profitable business isn't just about creating something great, it's about differentiation and standing out. And if you run a retail shop, you know just how hard that can be. Your brand, whether it's a personal brand, a product, or a storefront, is shaped by what people associate with you. And for retailers, that includes what's on your shelves. Finding unique products your customers won't see in big box stores takes time. Sourcing can be exhausting, and tying up your cash flow and new inventory, that's risky. That's why I'm so excited to partner with Faire. Faire is the largest online wholesale marketplace connecting hundreds of thousands of brands and retailers around the world. It makes discovering unique products simple and testing new inventory far less stressful. Retailers get net 60 payment terms, which means you can sell your inventory before you even have to pay for it. And they offer free returns on first orders, so you can try new brands with confidence. And if you're a brand listening, Faire also helps your products get discovered by retailers without endless cold pitching, because you know we hate a cold pitch on this show. If growing your shop, differentiating your inventory, and strengthening your brand reputation is part of your next level strategy, I highly recommend checking out Faire. If you're a retailer and you haven't placed an order through Faire before, you can find the link in the show notes and use code Katrina10 for 10% off your first order. Now, let's get into today's episode. Okay, you guys, welcome back to Fame Ready, the podcast to show you that anything is possible, yes, including fame. I'm your host, Katrina Owens, top personal branding and PR expert. So good to be back with all of you. And you know what's really fun, you guys? I am so excited to be celebrating almost an entire year of being a podcaster. And what is really cool, so I was reflecting on this earlier today because when I set out to start a podcast, there were lots of things that I dreamed of doing. There were lots of goals I had set for myself. And like anything, the journey is never linear. So, what I want to talk about today, because now the question that comes up inside the Fame Ready Entrepreneur Program with all of my clients, I'm hearing a lot like, I want to start a podcast. Should I start a podcast? And so that's what this episode is going to be about. I'm going to take you on my journey through becoming a podcaster, monetizing this podcast. And by the end of this episode, it's really going to be a great way for you to understand if you're ready to do it, if you can start to make podcasting a viable revenue stream for your business, and exactly what that looks like for you. So let's get into it, you guys. Okay, so let's kick off by just addressing the hot question of the hour, which really is, should I start a podcast for my personal brand? Oh, if I had $1 for every time I got asked this question, honestly, I probably wouldn't even need to monetize this show. Because I think what happens for a lot of business owners is, we feel like we want another platform, right? Like we have our social media accounts, maybe we're doing talking heads over there, but long form content is, I want to say, like making a comeback, but I'm not sure it ever left. But what we're seeing a lot now is this move to more trust building forms of content, right? And having a podcast is one of those things because most people, if they're a bullshitter, they can't talk for an hour or, even 30 minutes, 45 minutes. My episodes are between 30 to 45 minutes most of the time. So they're like short, actionable. I like to think they're entertaining. Sounds like you guys also think they're entertaining. So thanks for that. So they're definitely a medium that I recommend to most personal brands at some point. But here's the thing. I do not recommend that you start a podcast until you are super clear on what your personal brand actually is. Okay? And this is a mistake that we can all make, and we can all kind of benefit from learning this, right? So for me, I started my podcast a year ago. And for those of you that are longtime listeners, hey. And for those of you that maybe are newer, if you scroll back far enough and listen to some of the early episodes, you'll see they're actually not fame ready episodes. They are under a different, well, they're under the Fame Ready podcast, but the intro and how I talk about the podcast and introduce it is actually KO Your Brand. And that is what I launched my podcast as a year ago. And it was almost a year before that I had picked that name, started working on the branding, started working on the concept. So I guess, like, let me just give you some background. When I started building my podcast and ideating it and figuring out what it was going to be, I mean, that was when I was heavy into like the KO brand. I mean, for those watching me on YouTube, you can see my little KO necklace. Obviously, those are still my initials. Knockout Directive is like my corporation, but my brand has changed so much since then. So obviously, like Katrina Owens, the KO, like that's never going anywhere. But I launched KO Your Brand when I had a much smaller vision for myself and my business. And as I started to go along in building out my personal brand online, I realized just how much bigger my mission and my vision and my purpose actually was. So I got to a point where KO Your Brand felt great for like a smaller version of myself, but I remember watching the Alex Cooper documentary on Hulu, Call Her Alex. I think I've even referenced it on this show before. So she's the host of the massive podcast, Call Her Daddy. And when I was watching that podcast episode, I was like, okay, I need to really lean into making my podcast part of a larger movement. So while KO Your Brand is great, it was on brand for me at the time. It, carried weight for the audience that listened to it back then. It wasn't reflective of the woman I was becoming or the personal brand I was becoming. And so the word fame ready, or the concept of fame ready, is something that I have obviously developed over the course of building on my personal brand and my coaching programs. And so I was watching Call Her Alex and I was like, damn, I got to rename the podcast. And it was like, it wasn't just that documentary that made me realize it. It was like, I was watching that documentary, but then when people would ask me like, "Oh, like what's your podcast called?" or like, "What's it about?" I would just like almost cringe when I would say KO Your Brand. And I don't know why, because like it's not cringy. It's my initials and it has the word brand in it, but it just wasn't giving star power, right? And I took a good hard look at my business and I was like, if I want to have this movement, this brand that's bigger than me, but still connected to me, KO Your Brand ain't gonna cut it. Okay, so look at the names of all of the major podcasts in the world. And like I'll say in the world, but I mean these are the ones that are like big in my ecosystem that I actually listen to, right? So we've got like, obviously we have Fame Ready, but the Lady Gang, Call Her Daddy, The Toast, Juicy Scoop with Heather McDonald, Not Skinny but Not Fat. What are some other ones that I like to listen to? I mean, the Mel Robbins show, but like I don't recommend that you go putting things under your name until you have built enough brand recognition under your name. And so what KO Your Brand, when I put it in a lineup with some of the major shows, I was like, huh, it's not hitting. Like one of these things is not like the other. And I was like, okay, you know what? The legacy I'm going to leave in this world and live in this world, honestly, is my journey to stardom, to fame. Like, I don't think you guys quite understand the expansiveness of the visions that I hold right now. Like, I know I joke about it a lot, and you guys, I don't know if you just automatically think I'm joking or if you know that I'm also serious. But so, how do I say this? For those of you that have been following my journey online, maybe listen to this podcast often, y'all know that like I want to have a music career. And I was really shy about this in the beginning. Actually, you know what's really funny, you guys? One of my good friends, Lexi, from We Launch Monday, she is the talented designer behind my personal brand website, katrinaowens.com, by the way. Um, Lexi said to me the last time I saw her when we were in Wisconsin, I was speaking and she was photographing the event. She was like, you know what's so funny? When we met a year ago, you talked about the word fame and famous as in like a business owner sense, like, not traditional fame, but famous for your business. And Katrina, you've gotten so far past this, like now it's not famous for your business, it's like real fame. And what I said to her was, yeah, because, at the time, as I was building my brand off of the back of the word famous, it felt more digestible, it felt more normal, more rational, realistic, all the words that I hate. But the version of me back then felt like it was easier to talk about the word fame in the business owner sense and just say, like, as a business owner, you can feel famous for your work. This is what I believe in, blah, blah, blah. But over the last year, I've feeling famous as a business owner, easy, child's play. I've started to feel famous for being kind of an icon. And as I've grown an audience, started to work with more and more brands, I'm really starting to see the gravity of what I've created. I'm like, oh no, I want like fame. And so you heard it here first, you guys. I want like fame. And I think it's more attainable to all of us than ever before. So for those of you that follow me online, you know that I've been taking singing lessons since October. I absolutely love working with my vocal coach. I'm going to gatekeep him. Sorry, I am. I also just think he's not accepting new clients. So I got to keep as much of his time for myself as possible, because if I'm going to be a pop star, we've got to double down. And I've gotten more and more comfortable with just sharing like that I'm going to have a music career. And I think the more that I talk about it, the more that I say it out loud, yeah, it's going to happen, right? But what an amazing, like, in I don't know how long it's going to take, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years. At some point, when I have this music career and it's successful, someone's going to come back to this podcast episode, cut this clip from YouTube and be like, well, she called it all along. And I think that just builds my credibility so much. So right now, when I even look at the women I coach inside the Fame Ready Entrepreneur Program, it's like, you've got to be really committed to the bit of feeling famous, wanting to be a speaker, wanting to be an industry leader, and doing that work. Like, I'm not going to shy away from the fact that when I talk about fame, like I'm talking about like fame, you guys. So Fame Ready was a much more fitting name for the podcast episode. And when I think about the legacy that I continue to kind of carry out, well, in 5 years, when like I've got that fame, people are still going to listen to Fame Ready as their guidebook, their strategy, their way of looking at me and what I built, and saying to themselves, God, she can do it. I can do it too. So that's my really long tangent on naming. Okay. And I think I am so clear on my personal brand, what I stand for, what I'm building, what I want. And that is why this podcast comes very, very naturally to me. Okay. So every single week, I consistently record a podcast episode. And I was actually talking to someone the other day where I was like, there was a time when I thought I was going to run out of content ideas, but I never have, because things evolve. And I might do an episode that's really maybe similar to an episode like topic wise on something I recorded a few months before that, but I'm changing and learning at such a rapid pace that I'm always bringing new intel to this show. And I'm always taking examples from like what I see my clients doing and what's working for them and what I'm doing, and just really enjoying like bringing it all together and talking about it week after week. But if I was unclear on my personal brand, I think having new content to pull from, especially when I don't plan out these episodes with that much structure. So today, just because I've got some audience questions that I want to make sure I cover, I've got my Coles notes, but I mean, I've already gone off script. I mean, it's not even a script. I've already kind of gone off from the plan because this all just comes from my heart and my brain and what I'm actually actively building right now. And I think a podcast is a really great way to deepen your expertise and to deepen your speaking ability for sure. But it's also a really big investment, an investment of time, energy, and money. So when someone asks me, should I start a podcast? There's a couple different things that I think are really important to ask yourself. So obviously that first one is, do I have clarity on my personal brand and where it's going? Okay, we just talked about what that looked like for me, but really important for you to ask yourself that question. Okay. So if you say, yes, I do, Katrina, then ask yourself the second question. Do I have an audience? And be really honest with yourself. Okay. I didn't ask you, do you have a big audience? But do you have an audience? Because I'll be honest, maintaining a podcast when growth is slow, when you're not necessarily seeing exponential spikes in listenership, when, it doesn't seem like it's growing as fast as you hoped it would, you've got to stay committed to the bit. You've got to know that you have an audience on Instagram or on these other platforms where you can continue to promote your show to, so you can build up the listener base of your podcast. And this is something that I see people get wrong. So people are like, I don't want to show up on social media, so I'm going to start a podcast instead. But everything is so saturated right now, you guys. I'm willing to bet most people are not going to just stumble across your podcast if you're not promoting it in other places. So I'll be honest, I get a little bit lazy with this. I actually don't promote every single episode I record on Instagram or on social media at all. I'm trying to get better at this, but what I have found is that the talking head clips from podcasts just aren't as performing as well as they used to. And so one of the questions I actually got was about how are you repurposing the podcast into Instagram Reels? What equipment do you use? I actually don't think any of that matters. And I'll contradict myself. That's okay. I'm a walking contradiction. It's fine. So right now, I'm obviously recording this at my desk on a lower quality webcam when right next door, I have a gorgeous home studio that I invested money and time into building and creating. And I've made the sacrifice that we just don't have guests ever stay with us anymore because we don't have a bed for them to sleep in. We've got an air mattress if they like that, or there's some great hotels a 5-minute driving distance away. But I did that because I wanted to have the gorgeous talking head content to post on YouTube. YouTube and social media, I should say. So the reason why I haven't been using my studio is because we're doing some renovation. So right now it's still not quite done, but I've given myself the deadline. I'm like, but as soon as April hits, we got to be back in that studio, because I do think how this podcast looks on YouTube is important and great for increasing YouTube subscribers and all of that. But let's get one thing really straight, you guys. YouTube for your podcast and your actual podcast are two very, very different things. And so people will say, I want to grow a YouTube channel. I'm just going to post my podcast episodes over there. It's actually a bit of a different format. I post my podcast episodes on YouTube because I would be sorely remiss if I didn't, because I'm recording the video anyways. And so that's why it gets posted over there. Now, I have started to think about getting a bit more strategic about growing a platform over there. I'll be honest, I'm not really interested in being a YouTuber. Seems like a lot of work. Video content for me, not my favorite. I love to chat, and I think that's why my podcast from a Apple Podcast, Spotify, that sort of listener base does really, really well. I'm also not like a YouTube viewer. So you're never going to catch me like watching videos on YouTube. It's not my format of choice. So I think that's probably why I'm also not obsessed with creating content for that platform. So the question that one of my followers asked me was around equipment. And so just quickly, this is a Shure microphone. This is like one of the top of the line pieces of podcast microphones equipment that you could ever buy. Yes, it's an investment, but I mean, a great microphone is literally the key to a great podcast. In my podcast studio, I have a different type of webcam that's a little bit more high quality, but it's honestly still not the best. When I get back into my studio, what I really want to do is figure out how I can actually connect this microphone, the Shure, to my iPhone. And that's kind of my goal for myself, is I want to start recording my podcast on my iPhone for better video so we can clip it and it is like the most clear, good looking video ever. So that's like my future planning. But in the case of like this podcast, because honestly, most of the downloads and the listeners slash viewers are actually like not in it for the video, they're in it for the audio. That's why, like, for me, while we're going through this transition of like, okay, the podcast studio is like not available. I'm like, you know what? I'm still going to show up and record this podcast super consistently, because actually I'm not gonna get all like on my high horse that the video has to look a certain way, at least in the interim. I would say, like, for each and every person, if you're building like if you want to build this famous feeling, iconic thought leader personal brand, the video quality is important, right? So it is something to consider investing in, but I don't want it to hold you up. Even like, here's another look. So over the last 2 weeks earlier this month while I was traveling, I was like, I still want to record this podcast. So I took this microphone with me and I was actually trying to figure out, how can I hook up this microphone to my iPhone? And I tried to do it in the hotel room and for some reason it wasn't working. And so I was like, you know what? I know this microphone obviously connects to my laptop. My laptop has like the worst webcam of all time. So that's why, like, there's a couple videos that just look really rough. Like they were filmed on like a very, very old iPhone 4. And that's just because of technical difficulties. But I was like, hey, you know what? I am still not going to let this like hold me back from recording and being consistent. Okay. So don't let the video hold you up. But I think it's important that you're always trying to be better, striving to be better than you were before, and always trying to put out a better product. So let me just write that down, you guys. April 1st. That means I got to go to IKEA and get the rest of my stuff for my closet so I can finally get all those clothes out of there and just have my studio back. And then, you know what, I'm also going to try. So I haven't tried this yet. When I'm traveling, I now bought these like small DJI microphones that we're just using for like some casual talking heads. I think I can probably just use those, and that way I don't have to like disconnect this and bring it traveling with me. This is also like a $500 microphone, so I'm not very excited about bringing it around, having it in luggage and getting it tossed around. So that's what I'm going to do, because I actually think it's very fun for me to record podcasts while traveling. And oh my gosh, I even just thought to myself, when I'm in Spain this summer, like maybe my girlfriend and I that I'm traveling with, maybe I'll have her on the show. She is not a marketer. She has just been one of my very best friends since we were like 19. So maybe that's what we'll do in Barcelona, because I actually have 2 of these little travel mics. So stay tuned. But see how I'm always trying to like create. I don't let it needing to be perfect hold me back. I did that for a very long time, and that's why it took me a long time to start a podcast anyways. Okay. So let me go back to my list of questions from the followers. So we talked about, should I start a podcast for my personal brand? So what I had said was, yeah, you need to have a clear personal brand. You need to have an audience. Okay. Time and money. Yeah, that's the other thing. So this takes time. So I block out an hour every single week. And when I used to travel, I mean, not used to travel, but I used to try to record my episodes so I didn't have to record them while I was traveling. So that meant sometimes I'm recording 2 episodes in a week, 3 episodes in a week. And that just got really hard on my creative brain. I'm someone who does really well when I'm like inspired by something, and I'm really learning to like lean into this. Okay. So, human design, I'm a generator, and like I'm like a sacral generator. So that means I need things to respond to. So I'm not someone who sits here and maps out the next five episodes. Okay. I just know this is what I'm going to talk about this week. And usually I'm only picking that topic like maybe 24 hours in advance, maybe even like an hour or two before I record the show. So it is super off the cuff. Okay. So that's why you need time though. And you also need like creative space. Like, it's really hard to record a podcast episode when you're feeling rushed and you're in a time crunch. So, if you're someone who hasn't quite scaled your personal brand to a place yet where you have a team supporting you, where you have like white space in your calendar, I would say focus on those parts of your business first. Okay. The other thing that you need is money. So, for me, we do all the podcast production in house, the editing, all of that. I think one day I'd love to have like, professional podcast producer. I know some good ones out there, but for me, it's a budget thing right now. And as we kind of build the podcast now is finally monetized. So it's definitely paying me back, which is so exciting. But just really important to keep in mind, like all of this costs money. I think between like the equipment and building up my studio, I think I probably had like maybe $1,000, $1,500 budget just to like get the equipment. Obviously, recording in Riverside is a monthly subscription. The webcam I have in there that just like isn't that great, but it was expensive. And then the furniture. So yeah, that was about like an $1,000 to $1,500 upfront cost. Obviously, doing the podcast production in-house saves a lot of money, but it's still a couple $100 a month to, pay my team to be able to do that part. So yeah, there's that. And what else can I tell you about the costs? Riverside subscription. I also use Transistor as like the podcast distribution. So that's also a subscription. So I would say that monthly subscription cost for like the actual production is probably around $100 per month for the software. And yeah, last year I had set the goal back in, I want to say it was this time last year, where I was like, my podcast, I wanted to sign like a $5,000 podcast sponsor. And now it's been a year and I can say that we've exceeded that. So my podcast is finally in a place where it's paying me back. So if you have been listening to previous episodes versus like episodes that were recorded, a little while ago, you'll notice that we now run ads that aren't just me advertising my programs or my offers. And these are all like incredible sponsors that have come on board. So for my podcast, I charge, depending on the length of the podcast ad, anywhere between $150 to $250 an ad per episode. And you have to buy at least like a set of 5 to be able to invest, because I don't think anyone hears an ad once and then like never again. And that structure has allowed me to monetize my podcast. And I get to use my podcast as an extra asset with a lot of like brand partnerships that I have. So for me, I'm never just like, I try not to just sell podcast ads. Usually it's a more integrated sponsor where it's podcast ads plus an event sponsorship and plus some content, whether it's my email newsletter or social media. And so it's bundling all those things together. And if you are new to monetization, that is one of the most important pieces, because for me, I mean, this show is still relatively small in comparison to a lot of the monetized shows out there. Okay. So we sit in like the top 10% based on listeners. That is so top 10% globally. So of all the podcasts in the world, we're in the top 10%, which sounds great, but to me, I'm like waiting. I actually check my podcast statistics frequently, and I'm waiting for the day we move into the top 5%. I think it's going to come probably in the next couple months. And then obviously to be a top 1%, top 0.5%, like those are the markers that I'm working towards. So you can check your own podcast ranking at listennotes.com. So I'll be so honest. I have a very, very engaged podcast listener base. So I was at an event on the weekend, and I even had people telling me there that I had never met before that they've been listening to my podcast. Earlier this week, a vendor, someone I want to work with on Big Brand Energy Live, she was telling me that she was listening to some of my podcasts, which I thought was really, really cool. So the podcast is taking on a life of its own. It has a really engaged audience, but it's maintaining that through consistency and also knowing that the reality is based on like my current listenership, like charging more for a podcast ad probably isn't in my future until, I don't know, a couple months from now. This could all take off tomorrow, right? Every day I wake up and I ask myself, what if this is the day that changes everything? Okay. Big Brand Energy attendees, if you know, you know, one of my favorite things to say, because there are days when I like log into Transistor to check my podcast analytics and all of a sudden I've had 50 downloads in a day, which doesn't typically happen for me. And I'll get these really big spikes, which is really cool. So that's that. So that's that on monetization. So the biggest question to ask yourself, if you're someone who does have a podcast in the top 10% and you have an engaged audience on social media and you have other monetizable assets like content, a newsletter, your events, retreats, workshops, you're ready to start thinking about your podcast as an asset and monetizing it that way. But it's just all in how you frame it out. It's all in how you build out your packages so that whoever is sponsoring you isn't just getting like one touch point, they're getting multiple. So it feels more integrated. And that gives them more of an opportunity to see incredible results from that. So, yeah, that's kind of the look on should you start a podcast, what do you need, and whether or not you should start monetizing it. Yeah, it's really cool. Actually, I think by the end of April, this podcast will have generated more than $10,000 for me in the last couple months, which is really cool. And that's not even taking into consideration all of the people who like listen to this podcast and become clients or decide to come to an event. So if you have like podcaster on your heart, I really, really think you need to follow that. But just make sure that you're ready, because I am never going to suggest anyone goes all into all of these things right away. You definitely need to have the time, the energy, the money, and the personal brand to be able to bring it to life. Do you feel like you're the industry's best kept secret? You're the best at what you do, but it feels like it's not obvious online. The worst part, you feel it in your business. Maybe inquiries have dried up. Maybe your website looks like your competitors, and even the people close to you have trouble telling them apart. Maybe you keep getting passed over for PR and speaking features, so you're white knuckling it, posting more, burning out, trying to be seen. If you're a practitioner with hard-earned expertise, that's not a you problem. The online landscape has changed. Your expertise deserves to be unmistakable, not buried. Alyssa Sangalang is the founder of Contrast Collective, a boutique web strategy studio that helps experts become unmistakably trustworthy online, even in the age of AI and misinformation. She'll be at Big Brand Energy doing live website trust audits at her booth. If your online presence doesn't match the authority you carry in real life, come find her. Head to contrastcollective.co/trust to see where trust is leaking on your site right now. And head to the show notes too to grab your ticket to Big Brand Energy Live so you can meet Alyssa, get your website trust audit, and also start stepping into the next level version of yourself. Honestly, you guys, if you've ever dreamed of being a top podcaster, being a paid speaker, starting a nonprofit and really stepping into the CEO role. Big Brand Energy Live on June 11th in Surrey, British Columbia, Canada is the room for you. Tickets are 50% sold out. Yes, already. That's the power of a personal brand. So head to the show notes, use code FAMEREADY to grab your ticket for $50 off. And I cannot wait to see you in the room on June 11th. If you like this episode, you guys, please, 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 I'm begging you, I'm on my knees. Head to Spotify, head to Apple, give me a 5-star rating, a review. Tell me how much you love it so you can help other people find this show. Follow me at Katrina Owens PR on Instagram. You can follow the show at Get Fame Ready so you can start to see how we're going to try to market this show, not just talking head clips, maybe in some other different ways. It's a great way for you to get inspired on how to market your own show. And I'll see you all next week. Okay? Toodles, you guys.